All right, you guys. Welcome back to those in Investor Central Academy. What I want to do today was go over a couple of the charts you guys requested, talk a little bit about CPI data, what SPY did today as well, a little bit of the projections upcoming because PPI does come out tomorrow as well. And I also wanted to do a little bit of Wyckoff today. I know depending on the class that you're in, we may have gone into it deeper or not, depending on the requests by the classmates. But with that being said, let's jump straight into it. The first thing I want to do was talk about CPI data. What we did is we did have that happen overnight, right? In pre-market, we did get our CPI. Ooh, what's up? How you doing, Justin? Good to have you. All right. How you doing today?
What's up, dude? I'm doing good. Just trying to review all the stuff that we learned.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, let's it's perfect to go over, and I'm glad to have you join me today. What I want to talk about was I was just getting into it. We're talking about the CPI data, right? If you had looked at what I'd said, if CPI data came in lower than what we had projected in terms of expectations, you should have expected a rally upwards. And from that rally, what we did was, you can imagine if I zoomed out just a little bit here, what that did was that it put us right up here, right at the resistance. So what I was telling the group and telling everybody pre-market wise was, hey, notice we're right at the resistance of this upper boundary as well. We're very likely going to get some sort of sell-off to start off. And what, lo and behold, what happened right off as the day started. Let me go into it in terms of, we'll take a look at the minute chart just so we see exactly what happened with the movements. And actually, I'll redraw these in a moment. They'll come right back on here in a sec. So, what do we expect? Well, first off, we can think of it as, I'll leave that red line because it kind of played out. The first thing you want to think about is we have two Fibonacci's to think about. The very first one is that pre-market one. You go and you take that pop because you go from the news up until, the big giant candle we have here up to the top. And do you notice how we pretty much sold off right before into the golden pocket? And if you really drag it on further, isn't that kind of perfect in terms of where we landed, right? Like I said, this is a very good target area for the sell-off to happen. And then you look at how it respected that. Do you see how quickly it bounced back up, came back up into this channel up here? And the next step that you can also notice is this big green candle that broke us through the upper resistance as well of pre-market high, right? So those were your indications that we had more upwards to go, okay? Now keep in mind, it came back to retest, right? Retest, and eventually came further back down, meaning that this didn't hold the first time, okay? We went up higher. Like I'd said here, we could come back further down and come back up, but eventually we did come back up, you see, right? And wavered around a little bit for the rest of the day, okay? Now, what does this mean in terms of going into tomorrow? Well, tomorrow, this is a very bullish move. What did CPI data ultimately tell us was that from the data readings that we have, inflation has likely or potentially peaked here. And as a result, the Fed, with what they've done in terms of raising rates, can start to kind of back off on what they want to do, what they originally had planned, okay? And so, but I mean, obviously, if you understand CPI is this, it's silly because they could just pull up, grocery stores and prices of things, and they have data, but instead they choose to do this survey situation where they survey certain things and they play with the numbers. You know how statistics works, right? When you're trying to game the data, which is what they do with CPI data, the projections of 8.7%, right? Last month was 9.1. So we came in at an 8.5. Now, let me ask you this, is 8.5% inflation good by any means for our economy? It's terrible. The fact that we're rallying is kind of, it is hope. It is one of those things where they can continue to play the game, okay? What are the things that they're doing to continue to play the game? Well, I do want to take a moment and here, we'll just zoom completely out. We don't need all this stuff on here. I'm just going to go to SPY on the weekly. And we can take a look at our big giant rally that we have here. You got to keep in mind, this was money printing out the wazoo, okay? And then they started to announce that they're going to stop the money printing. They're going to start pulling money away from the markets. But what have our rallies really been? Remember, we have the CHIP Act, right? Right now we have the inflation bill, right? So ultimately, politicians continue to do their best to pump money back into the system. That's where we're starting to see a lot of these relief rallies and a lot of these pumps back up. But I also want to point out, for example, something like Tesla, Elon sold around here when, in terms of Tesla's charts, right? Elon just announced as well that he just sold off. Bill Gates and a lot of the big billionaires sold a lot of their stock, Bezos as well sold a lot of their stock near the top already. Okay. So I do want you to keep that in mind, that there's still a very bearish outlook for this, but we have started to peak our way up through certain resistances. Now, it doesn't mean we couldn't, go further up. It's possible, but there still needs to be forces that push the money up, push the prices up. Okay. People need to be willing to take on those risks. All right. So we'll take a look. There are some companies in some situations, because you want to remember the market works in cycles, and depending on what you're looking at, technology or energy, depending on what it is you're looking at, they're in different phases of them as well. Okay. And so tech recently had a nice little rally. If you look at Apple, Tesla, all those types of things, but you will also want to take and peek a little bit at their indicators too. Let's do that real quick. If you take a look at Cpi right here, Cpi on the weekly is starting to get kind of high on here. This isn't anything to really think about just yet on the weekly big picture. We're getting up there, but there's nothing to say, hey, it's an advantageous position to take just yet. But if I zoom in on something like the daily, well, the daily is definitely starting to show. Like I have been shouting at you guys saying, hey, but again, it was a little bit early here. I was just pointing out that our indicators are getting very, very high up here. Okay. So now that we've gone up a little bit, we've got this resistance and this resistance, that where we turn back around very likely could be a nice little sell-off relief. Because if we have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then you get your ABC that's going to be a little bit bigger. Okay. And so it very much seems as if now after that, we're going to have that fifth leg up, that fifth rally, if that makes sense, or fifth wave, right? And let's do that real quick. I'm going to zoom in this. I know this looks terrible, but we're just going to focus on this little section right here. I'm actually going to hide this behind it because it's just adding to the clutter. And what I want to point out is we did notice our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from here, from the bottom, 1, 2, and then we're talking about it. Could it be 3, 4, 5? Yes. But now that we've continued, it's more likely we have something like 3, 4, and a 5, right? And so with those retracements, you can see from 1 all the way up to 1, we retrace the 0.618. That's a fib number, right? Okay, down here where 2 is, right there. Okay, then from there you could take the extension of that and see from 1, from the bottom of 2, where are we at right now? Well, 3, you could almost call this right now where we're at, right at the 1.618. So what that means is right here, this move up compared to this so far, right, is exactly an expansion of a Fibonacci number, 1.618. Do you see that? We're actually sitting right at it right now. Okay, so we should expect some form of resistance here, but if we do continue to break up, right, then we can take a look at potentially having this wave 3, right? I'm still thinking we're going to have some sort of relief here, right? I don't believe our wave 4 is done yet. I think we're going to come back at least back down to like 408 or something like that before we head further up, because we do need relief. Okay, we've been buying, okay, and yeah, there is more bullishness right now, right, due to those values, but we also have to keep in mind PPI comes out tomorrow, and if the producers are showing that costs are still high, that could cause the markets to potentially still drop a bit. Okay, so there's still other things and other fear factors on the horizon. Obviously, there's always fear and greed that we have to consider. Then what else do we have here is we have our bigger picture, this white resistance line that I've drawn down here. And so I do think that we very likely will drop a little bit, and then we're going to come back up to test that, is the idea right now. Okay, so that's SPY. Let's jump into as well QQQ. Oh, actually, before I do that, let's jump into the VIX, because the VIX is always important for us to understand what happened today. You could have had your indication that we're headed up today because why? Because the VIX broke previous support. Do you see that? The markets are headed up in a strong fashion because now that fear of that the interest rates were going to get raised higher than 75 basis points, that fear is gone because CPI data is showing that it's lower. Now, here's the thing I do want to point out too. Our VIX is gathering a lot of energy down here, right? It's creating this falling wedge, and falling wedges, when you take a look at VIX in terms of its behavior is falling wedges into breakouts, okay? Falling wedges into breakouts. So question is, are we now, look, right, support, right? Support back here. It's an area where we very often get these bounces from. So I would not be surprised if tomorrow or the day after we experience a significant down day of this situation of the VIX jumping back up. So keep an eye on this, all right? Now I know because one thing I want to give you, because depending on the classes that you took, I may or may not have actually gone into like specific trading view tricks. But here what you could do is on the right, you can click and add an alert. So the moment that this actually breaks above or below a certain number, my phone will actually pop up and tell me, hey, this is happening, right? And then it helps me go into my brokerage to go take a position if that's what I've been planning for due to what my charts have said. Now, something even more fun, take something like a slanted line here, this yellow one. If I not double click, I have to right click on it, add alert on trend line, I could actually have it the moment it breaks this trend line too. Do you see that? So that's what I love about this. And so for example, something like NEO, we're looking at NEO here, 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 the first three resistance points up here. Well, it would make sense to add an alert onto this trend line that whenever it did cross over here, right, you should be able to take that, and what you'll see is there'll be a little alert sign on here, okay? Just a little trick for you. But yeah, if we break back above this, right, I will adjust this just a little bit to fit these new bounces that we came off, right? It hits all of those. And so again, markets will go down if we, depending on where we are on this line, okay?
And the VIX works inversely to the market, correct? Like,
yes,
if it goes up, then stuff starts going down, right?
Yep, let me show you that right here as well.
Oh, yeah.
We're just gonna put them both on the daily. This bottom one, let's put this on SPY. Okay. So SPY, let's align this just a little bit. We got to get 22 back down here. So 2022, let's line that up. Okay, that's close enough. Okay. Okay. Do you see the inverseness that I'm trying to line up right now? I wish there should be a number where I just adjust it all completely, but let's show you here. Okay, so the VIX is a standard deviation calculation, and anytime it breaks out of previous ranges, so you can imagine like this is a previous range, the moment I break out of it, you get these spikes away because now you're calculating values that are outside of an expected range of values. Does that make sense? Because this was maybe the mean, and then you had your standard deviation one on both sides. The moment we head into outside values outside of that, you start to expand that standard deviation, and that's where you get these spikes, okay? So for example, as well, up to a certain point, we had been going up in this channel, all right? And you can notice that anytime that we had these big green spikes are generally when we had these reliefs down, right? So VIX going up means we go down on our markets, right? VIX going down, this one is this one going up. Do you see that? So VIX going up is this going down. Okay, that makes sense? So VIX going up was this going down, right? But this downward here, I should use different colors on this. This downward here, right, is this up here. Do you see that? So this coming down here was just a whole rally that we had right here, okay? But again, just like I said, we're at these points where we could have a very quick move up. Like a lot of these, if you look at the days where these happen, it's usually some sort of news. CPI data came in, it was terrible, right? Somebody's earnings crapped the bed, right? There's a lot of situations where it's like, hey, you know, what was the first big drop? I want to say this one or this one, I forgot, was when we had Russia announce that they were going to invade Ukraine, right? And it brings in fear into the markets. Was it this one or this one that was when the ship got stuck in the Suez Canal, right? And all of a sudden trade stopped for a little bit and we had to deal with that in terms of the news, okay? So that's where the macros really do make an effect, right? That's why I do my best in our chat to keep you guys updated with what the news is saying, but also always one step further than, hey, if the news is saying this is the psychology of the fear and the greed, and we might want to be taking this other side instead, right? And so right now, you want to keep in mind, the lows of these, we had fear that was in like the 10s and quite low, like the 20s. We've rallied back up, and right now it's fear greed is around a 50. So it's right in the middle because there's conflicting indications of them though, okay? And those conflicting indications do come back down to how we're treating the bond market and how we're treating equities and the dollar as well. So here's another one, is not only the VIX, but DXY. Like I said, the dollar, you know, some people like to save their money and put it into the mattress, you know, under their mattress. But if you notice here too, the dollar is also something that moves inversely as well, right? So anytime it goes up or down, it also fluctuates up and down just as well, okay? So here you have this upward movement, you had it come down, you had it come down, you had this come back up, okay? So SPY and the dollar move inversely because again, you got to think about them as exchanging between each other, right? Okay, let's go into QQQ. And I was also saying this about QQQ before as well. We were right at this resistance. If we break above that resistance, let me show you. This resistance right here, now that we've broken it, you see that? We've broken it and we've technically retested it as well. Do you see that? Okay, so QQQ is actually showing some pretty bullish move, quite a bullish move right here. But just as well too, it is also getting very overextended up on this upside, okay? Similar 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think we still have a fifth leg up. So what I expect is that we very likely could come up toward these previous resistances, but also relax back down, okay? So it's hard to tell if it'll go up or if it'll come straight down first because of how low, you know, how high we are here. Does that make sense? Do we just immediately test and create a little zone right here? Okay, there's a possibility that we'll get some chop for a little bit because we've been kind of just chopping around this area so far, okay? And if we do break up above, either retest the top of it or the overall trend line that we're at, okay? If this green one that we have isn't the official test, okay? We can zoom in a little bit. Let's go into something like the 30-minute chart. And if you notice, the 30-minute chart's showing some, you know, some divergences, if you may, right? We're starting to head back down. So what I could see here is having something like, right, headed further down. Okay, but we do have significant supports, right? If you notice this bounced really hard right here. So keep in mind, it's not just going to head straight down. It's very likely going to have retests, right, and chop around here before making a final decision. PPI tomorrow also will influence it as well, whether it breaks above or out of this channel too, okay? Okay, let's real quick too. I'm just gonna regular trading hours. We're just gonna pull this out onto something like the 2 hour right now. And I just wanted to take a look at QQQ in terms of where all the buyers and sellers are right now. So if I took this off, you just did your VPVR or VRVP. Okay, so what does this do in terms of this orange line that's coming out? Is this orange line shows me where the biggest volume is, right? That's where the most amount of people have purchased and sold right here. Okay, so that would probably be right where we start to reject this move up. If we have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's probably where I expect the ABC to start when you think about it, okay? Because you do have this big gap here. If we break above these people, which we're right at, right? If we break out of this channel in this area where high volume, this is an area of quick velocity. We can move through it quickly because there's not as many people there trying to trade at this point. That makes sense? Okay, so you can see all of a sudden right here how we really don't have as much volume. Okay, what else? Be aware we do now have a bit of a gap here too. Okay, we have gap. This one got filled. Above here though, we do have this one that we're now kind of testing. Okay, so it wouldn't be surprising to see us fill up that gap and then revert back down to deal with these numbers. And here's another thing to consider too. This is now, if this turns around, this is lower, but this is all similar prices. So that's your divergence on a 2 hour that would potentially bring you back toward at least that gap below. You see that? There's a potential $5 move back down if this does turn over. Okay. All right. Before we go into the requests for today, such as Neo, I'll go over Roblox as well too. But I just wanted to give you guys the update on the 10 versus 2 year yield. Today's news caused the yields to, oh yeah, they ask you to upgrade if you want anything more than the daily comparison of these. I don't need anything more than daily comparison of the yields. Here, what it is it's showing that it bounced up, right? But what we want to understand here is that this is the gap between the two. So this is still showing that the 2 year yield is commanding a larger price or a larger yield than the 10 year, and that's why we're in a negative percentage basis. This is still the possibility that we are still, this is a premonition of recession, okay? This is a leading indicator of a recession, like I've told you guys. And so keep in mind, this is not a very good sign. And it's actually very, very terrible for the fact that, hey, we're so far down here and we keep going further. And the last time it was this bad was the tech bubble, okay? And you can almost look at it as this one just happened faster, or you can imagine this to be that. You see that? So it's just, we got, this doesn't mean we're out of the woods. This actually means interest rates and things start to raise, and actually a lot of pain for people too, until things start to cool down again. Okay, so again, things are always cycles. Right now, unfortunately, we're at the bottom of this cycle. So, but it does produce a lot of opportunities if you happen to have your ducks in a row. Okay. Okay, today we got some fun stuff for you guys. I wanted to talk about Neo. We'll pull up Roblox. We'll pull up these other charts as well. But there's a little bit of additional reading I did put into ICA graduates for those that want to study this a little bit more with me. But again, this is similar to what happened with Peloton when I caught that pop of it. Okay, I caught a pop of Peloton back when it was around that $20 range, when it went through a bit more of distribution. But ultimately there's a lot of indicators, and I want to compare it to this so that you can understand what's happening. And we're not just going to talk about, oh yeah, price is getting tighter here, but we got to talk about supply and demand. Okay, so Peloton. When I was teaching one of the first classes we did, and we noticed this was And it's funny, I had this note here, is like, if nothing changed, sell the hell out of this company. Nothing's. So this pop right here, okay, this W shape is what I want to point out here. Okay, this is the part that we saw, and then we had the pop with the news afterwards. All right, but look at this. So what are the things about an accumulation process? Because you want to keep in mind, this did go through accumulation. When you think about it, this accumulated and it popped up and they distributed up here. Okay, it was very quick. It was a smaller distribution of a situation versus I can go into this daily and monthly, and I can show you the big giant distribution that Peloton went through. But let's talk about this in terms of people and their prices and what they're willing to support. Okay, so usually you have this big giant selling and big giant selling climax, right? Notice this volume, and even if I were to go back out here and just zoom out, that volume is giant compared to a lot of different parts of this previous, even the big giant drops that you had. This selling candle and this selling amount was so giant, it was even more than up here. Do you see that? Okay, so that gives you a possibility of looking for a selling climax, which is what we're looking for here. That was a selling climax, and it immediately creates a lower boundary. When you get a selling climax that also hits the lower bounds of some sort as well, we usually try to relieve from there too. And what you're looking for is a quick reaction. Where did the stock want to go right after? Because you can imagine it's like saying, let's use the iPhone example again. iPhones dropped to like 500 bucks. Everybody snatched it up right away. It shot it back up to 6 to 7. It shows that there's demand pushing it upward. Do you see that? And so let me give you guys, let's do 30-minute chart here, because the candles will start to look a little better. Come on, scoot over. Okay, there we go. So it's down here. So we had a big push, and it was this earnings that actually pushed it down, right? Oh, actually, that's way too. We'll have another potential one coming up here. Let's talk about it here. Okay, this was the pushback here. And on a bigger picture, I'll also show you how it has a redistribution look to it. But today, let's focus on this accumulation, and so we can compare it. The first thing is you shake out your paper handers in the first fell swoop, okay? You usually have a little area where you first find some supply and demand right here, okay? So you can imagine this is what we call the preliminary supply. The first area where sellers and buyers first come to equilibrium. That creates your upper bound of the channel, right? Do you see that? This creates this part of the channel where this is the resistance, these people, okay? And that's the top part of your channel. Then your selling climax creates the bottom part of the channel. Do you see that? Okay, so with that as a result, we're trading in here. That makes sense? All right, so they'll label, this is called the preliminary supply, PSY, and then this is your selling climax, okay? From your selling climax, you'll notice, actually, it hit this and it shot back up. You see this green candle, actually, it came down and went straight up. Do you see that? That's called an automatic rally or automatic reaction, okay? Because you want to see, like, they're saying, hey, this is so cheap. Buy it all up. Give me everything, okay? And as a result, it shoots the price back up, and then it'll usually come back down a little bit pretty quickly. So you can see this little zigzag, right? You usually have Fibonacci back up here, and then you have another Fibonacci back down here, okay? So what that does is preliminary supply, selling climax, automatic reaction, and then you have a second test. Your second test not hitting below the selling climax, and your secondary test having a lot lower supply shows that we favor the upside, okay? Then in addition, what you want to do is you want to compare, we headed down to this area 3 times. 1, 2, 3. What we got to do right now is we got to go a little bit closer, and we got to explain what the candles are telling us here and what the volume ultimately is doing too. So a little trick here real quick, we're just going to take off VPVR. We don't need him right now. He's just adding clutter. We're also, because of this big volume, I'm just going to try to scoot him off the screen, right? Because what it does, it allows me to read the bottom volume here more relatively. That makes sense. When I get them out, you see how they get a little bit bigger, okay? What I want to see here is I need to compare, there's 3 groups here. Paper handers number 1, paper handers number 2, and you got diamond handers over here. That makes sense? They shake you out first. They tell you, you know, Peloton's a crappy stock. Nobody wants it. The leadership is really poor. It shouldn't be this high, and it drops. Or in this case, it was also because of something like earnings and you know, leaked news, okay? From there, it reacts. It reacts and it jumps up and it goes up, right? But then when it comes back down, you have to do more to shake out people to take out their shares. Does that make sense? So your choppiness is a lot, you know, you get smaller candles and more choppiness and more, it takes more time, okay? Then when you go and do it again, the question is, do they let you go lower than previous values? In this case, they did, okay? And as a result, when it came back down here, you actually, this one's a little tough to see because of the volume shooting up so much. Let me see if I can scoop him off. Look at that green candle right there, okay? So what I'm trying to point out here is that you're looking at it coming down and seeing, we had all these people selling. We had a lot of sellers. Do we have as many sellers here, or are they holding on to their shares? If they want to get out, this will go up. Does that make sense? And we'll continue further down. If this is dying down compared to this, and you can almost, you know, visualize the blue, right? This is much slower than this overall. That makes sense? You could even average this out kind of and say it's up here, while the lower end, and especially as you get toward the bottom, right? You have kind of this choppiness that nobody's letting go of. They shake out last people, right? They shoot it down very quickly and it comes right back up and it retests and heads back up. And here's what you want to look for is you want to look for supply and demand suddenly outweighing supply so much that you get the small candles turn into big candles. And that's your sign of strength. So in terms of it, this would have been a great candle to play the upside on after it broke back out of that range. That makes sense if you didn't get in over here, okay? Now I want to keep in mind, this is still a small picture accumulation because I'm showing you this on a 30-minute chart and it happened in here within a couple of days, okay? Not even a whole month, okay? As a result, the company itself never did anything to change itself, never really got any better. And even though it had that pop, it failed right out of it, okay? So the pop right here that we just showed you, it went back up, went to previous values, but that accumulation finished and distributed back. That make sense? Now where we're at right now, let's see if we can see something similar to that. So number one, we have the first area where we have buyers and sellers that came in. That's our preliminary supply, right? That preliminary supply generally creates our upper bound of resistance. Then we're going to look for a selling climax, right? Selling climax down here, okay? And that creates the bottom of the area as well. Actually, if we combine all this could be selling climax. We've already gone down 1-2 times and we're coming back up. So with that also being said, let's drop in a quick Wyckoff possible accumulation chart right here. And let me show you how there is this potential here. But the thing though is Peloton as a company still is complete trash. They've got infrastructure out and around, but they don't necessarily have the right type of leadership to do anything good with it at this point. The best bet for them, in my personal opinion, is to get a buyout from someone else, Apple or Amazon. They have been in the pipeline, but they weren't going to purchase back up there. I have a belief that they very likely could be looking to, you know, purchase or to buy the company out. Otherwise, the company is just going to end up going bankrupt at the end of the day. And it's going to suck because everybody's going to have all these Pelotons sitting at home. But One thing I will point out is there is a little bit, so you could argue here, we got 1, 2, 3 lower. So 1, 2, 3 lower. And now we're at last point of supply headed back up for the sign of strength. So we could have that. Okay, that's one argument. The other one is that your selling climax is here and you're actually doing a head and shoulders situation, right? Or selling climax was here, sorry. And you have the head and shoulders situation. So we could be breaking up as well. So there are some bullish signs for Peloton, but as a company overall, the reason, first off, they're about to be a penny stock soon because of it. If you look at their income statement, guys, their profit margin, come on, guys. Like, I look at the company, I'm like, how do you guys screw this up so badly? Like, they commanded quite a bit over the pandemic, which was awesome, but they played their cards completely wrong. They believed everybody was just going to get stuck at home for the rest of eternity, and they didn't play those cards to be like, what if that didn't happen? If that didn't happen, we need to have places where people go that could ride the Peloton if they can't get it at home, kind of thing. So they didn't play those cards right. And for that reason, I'm looking at it as the company itself should be headed further down if they don't make these corrective measures for the way that they deal with the company. However, you see there's buy signals in terms of the fact that the company itself right now is in some, let me pull up daily and weekly, in some fairly, this has to relax back here, but if you look at something like the weekly and monthly, it's at these oversold conditions and should have a move up in that situation. But a crap company is a crap company at the end of the day. Okay. There is some, like, if you take a look at here, let's go back to this weekly real quick. There's a little bit of big money interest, but it's nothing that would make me say, oh, like, go in on it right now. You see this big giant candle right here, but they're at that PSY area. So if this is additional spring accumulation, right, this lower area right here, you can imagine on a bigger picture, we got to get back up before you would have confidence in this name anyway. Okay, so just be aware of that. Peloton, I wanted to use that example of the accumulation because what we're going to do is we're going to jump right into NEO. And I want to show you this on NEO. NEO as a company, when I was up here, like the company wasn't making money just yet to support a lot of these. The earnings has always been negative when you take a look at this. Okay, so the company itself, yeah, there was a point where it was all growth, but you got to keep in mind the growth has somewhat, hit a plateau in sorts. And also due to the whole EV situation, they have supply constraints that they have to battle with now. Now, what's good to look at here, first off, here, let me just chart it on the actual chart and I can share it with you guys too. You have this upper shelf right here, okay? So this whole situation up here sits up here, all right? That itself, you could right now go into the Wyckoff and show how that's actually a distribution right here. Where if I went out a little bit further, you can see there's up here, there's one, and then the bigger picture of this is another one too. Do you see that? So I'll let you guys compare that a little bit more on your own, where you would have preliminary supply, buying climax, secondary test, you have your up thrust right here, okay? And then here's your last point of supply, LPSY, before it shakes itself back down to these areas. Do you see that, how I lined that up, right? The timing isn't exact, the way that I've drawn this out, but at the end of the day, the peaks and the valleys and the way that it moves is all there, okay? Now, that's Wyckoff distribution. After distribution, we usually have some form of redistribution to continue down, and then you can look for, this could be redistribution to head further down, or it could be accumulation. Let's see if we can find and look at what's going on to potentially see where things are headed, okay? And what I also did in here was the little PDF that I added for you guys, and I took a screenshot of a couple of parts where we can read this out in terms of this, okay? So accumulation, what I charted for you guys already here was we have our preliminary supply, the first area where we have significant selling that starts. We hit our selling climax down here and we very quickly rally and automatically go back up. We have a secondary test that does come back down in this one, right? The first secondary test you could argue is either in here or potentially back in here. We rally back up, and here what I'm thinking is we're at this area right here, last point of supply. Let's go a little bit deeper into this to see if this makes more sense too. Does our volume support all that? Well, that's why we zoom in. We've got how many times we go down, and let's look at the volume, okay? Now, I do want to point out, with the spring action, we could still come down here before heading back up. This could still take some time and do this and take forever and get those last diamond handers and paper handers out, or out before it heads up. That's a possibility, especially when you think EVs long-term, if NIO, as the company that it is poised to be in China, does continue, it is a good possibility, all right? Now, what else do we need to take a quick and peek at here is making sure that we see our areas that we come down to. Giant selling, yes. Okay, selling up here. Second time we come back down, oh, hey, volume's a bit lower. Do we run out of sellers already? It kind of almost does look that way almost, right? It does, there could be bad news and it could drop down. We can't predict that. But in terms of the price action, we're showing not only this right here, we've got a bunch of big money buyers here, right? Bunch of purchasing that happened. Could it be shorts covering? It could, right? We have to consider that. Consider that this is shorts covering and they're now reshorting up here, okay? But you also want to think of the bulls situation. Bulls also stepped in too and very likely purchased at this area, okay? And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that could be a possibility, okay, in terms of Elliott wave movement upward. Now let's get some additional numbers and fibs in here. So if we're from the bottom and we're going to measure the fib to the top, we haven't quite hit the 0.5, but we've kind of struggled to break back past down that 0.382. Do you see that? Okay. So we're actually holding in this area right now to an extent. And so that's something to really consider, that there is still, it's still being propped up. We're actually running out of buyers and sellers already before even getting back down here. Okay. So ultimately, what I would really look for is looking for these previous resistances. If we break down, you could take puts and it'll head further down back to that Fibonacci resistance, very likely, right? If we break back up, that very likely means that this retracement that we had is potentially over, right? And we could have a movement up. Now, what else do we want to look for? So the thing here that we do want to also keep and look for is we do want a large green candle to show up in order to push it back up above here and to push back up here, okay? So whatever candles do show up at these lines and where they close is extremely important. If we have a candle that goes up, touches something and reverts straight back down and it closes down below these previous numbers, then it's very likely we're going to come back further down and retest before we have decisions, okay? Because what that means is people are selling very quickly up here and it's staying within this range, okay? But the breakout out of this, so what would you do in this situation? Very likely you could go here and find your previous lines. I'd look at this previous reaction here and probably set an alert for NIO when it breaks above those values to monitor it. Okay, but keep in mind, not on the first break. You could play the first break. If you do, play it quickly. Otherwise, wait for a retest for a larger picture situation. That make sense? Okay. But when you take a look at this, I do think that we have that the lower yellow is if we end up with a spring instead. And the upper yellow bound is that, hey, we're very potentially coming back to the 0.5 before heading further up. And what you're looking for here with a SOS or sign of strength, let's read that out loud here. Okay. Springs or shakeouts occur late within the trading range, allow the market and its dominant players to make a definitive test of available supply before markup campaign will unfold, okay? If the amount of supply that surfaces on a break of support is very light, low volume, it is an indication that the way is clear for a sustained advance, okay? So does that make sense? So if we break, the amount of supply that surfaces of a break of support is very light, low volume breaking support shows that it's clear for a movement up, okay? Let me show you here. Let's take a look at this other one. Let's look at Peloton, because Peloton has actually played out, remember? And so let's go into the hourly, pull him up. Okay. So low volume to break out. Now I want to point out too with Peloton, the thing was that it did have the breakout due to news, and that was a catalyst, right? Okay, but take a look here. What I want to point out here for the low volume is how low volume propelled it forward. Okay, so it's hard to say right here, because right here you initially do have, actually, I'm looking at the wrong part right here, but this does actually line this one up here. So the breakout was actually fairly low volume to push it up there, okay? A lot of buying didn't actually happen to here. What does that mean? That a bunch of people purchased right here and want the price to go up. Do you see that? Right? Because wouldn't you expect this break to be this volume, right? That's what my eyes drew myself to first, and that's not right. The low volume broke us out, and then extreme buying happened at the retest of the upper bound of the channel. That's big money right there. And you bet big money bought it up at under 30 and sold it at about 40, right? Okay. And then 1, 2, 3, this one didn't even make the full 4, 5 up. I think there was a small 1, 2, 3, or you could argue 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but this would potentially touch back down and wasn't a good move up, okay? So with that being said, that's what you're looking for, right? You're looking for, if this breaks up above with low volume, that shows that the people down here have let go of all the shares that they need to, and the price is ready to move up, right? All the iPhones that could have been sold at that $500 to $600 range have been snatched up, and we're ready to move the price up to 7, 8, 9. Do you see that? And so that's where that low volume comes in. But if all the volume comes in, that means there's enough of people that are selling at 600, 500, and it keeps the price down there, okay? Another thing as well, let's go into a sign of strength, right? And so that was the low volume part. Heavy supply mean a renewed decline. Do you see that? Moderate volume may mean more testing support and to proceed with caution. So medium volume means uncertainty, all right? Spring shakeout also served the purpose of providing dominant interest with additional supply from weak holders. So the spring down here, that 1, 2, 3, 3 lower values, that's really to shake out the last paper handers, if you understand, okay? What you're looking for in terms of NEO is this thing called a jump across the creek, JAC, with a sign of strength, increasing spread and volume. So bigger candles and more volume is what you're looking for. What is a jump across the creek? A jump across the creek is this idea that on this trading range that you have, you can imagine a soft blanket being thrown on top of it. So, and that blanket acts as kind of a resistance line, okay? If we break above it, it's often we'll come back to retest that creek before we move further. So there's the argument that you could say that this was a first jump across one of the creeks, but now you still have this to break through. And so each break, if this is a sign of strength, we want another sign of strength with increasing volume, larger candles to show that we're very likely going to head further up, right? That makes sense? Break it with low volume, but have strength in terms of the candle size and the spread of the volume of the price, okay? Right? Only a few PS3s or PS5s break it above, and now the prices have been locked in above, so everybody's trading for those higher prices. Okay. That's NEO. All right, I do want to point out just again, they still don't make money, guys. So, I mean, yes, they have billions of dollars reported, but keep in mind, as a company themselves, they're still losing. EPS is still negative, right? And their profit margin is still negative. So keep that in mind. All right, what else? We'll go into Google. Google's got a real interesting accumulation look too. Let's go into that. Google, I don't even need to argue about in terms of making money or not. They make plenty of money. However, with their split, what did I say about the split, guys? Split very likely is going to bring people to the market, and then they're going to get dumped on right after the split, right? You can imagine those little areas right there. Earnings was poor on this, but not as poor. Careful there. This is a red arrow pointing down, but keep in mind, Google still made almost $70 billion, okay? And their miss was 0.16%. They missed by $100 million, which is a lot by our standards, but compared to what they do make on a big picture, that's nothing. And compared to a lot of the smaller companies, the surprises were very small. So as a result, the company itself rallied from this negative earnings report, and we've actually jumped up from there, okay? So we have this trading range. You see that? We've got a preliminary supply with people selling, and then equilibrium, and then we have a selling climax where we come further down, and we've got a big bunch of sellers here too that bring it all the way down, okay? So you've got this trading range. Let's take a quick look. You're in here, and what we got to do now is we got to pull into a little bit more of a view of what's going on. Are they getting people out of their shares? Well, let's take a look at weekly too. Let's see if the weekly gives us a better. Ooh, that's a little more indecisive than you might want it. Okay, do you see that? Do you see this right here where closed, then closed, then closed, then closed, then closed, then closed, right? Okay, so what does that mean? Well, we do have this W shape that we keep coming back down to, but the issue here is, do we necessarily have less selling every time we come down? Do you see how the red's getting bigger, right? So that actually says that people are willing and still willing to sell at this point. You also do have an antitrust case coming up against Google as well. So that very likely could create some issues down in September and October if bad news comes out about them, and the way that they do their advertising could put a cog in the wheel, you might imagine. It might make it where they have to adjust the way they do advertising, and that might hurt their revenue. So keep that in mind. So Google, yes, it's hard to, the hard part about Google is, yes, we understand it is a company that has overtaken the world, all right? But I also want you to think of it like big money too. Is big money looking at this as, everybody's going to invest in it, they're going to be rich in the future? Or is it like, hey, everybody's willing to invest in it, so I've got a bunch of people I could dump on here, right? I'm thinking the second one. And with the whole antitrust situation, and also here's another, one of my theories that I can keep coming back to here is this one that is related to that alpha trends chart. I'm going to post it in a moment. But here what you have is you have your distribution up here, okay? And your distribution has already finished itself, and we were at this last point of supply, and we came down, and we're at, you can also imagine that in this chart, this itself could be a flag to head further down. That makes sense? Okay, so there's a possibility here that Google, with its stock split, could have actually a fall back down toward the bottom of this channel as well. But again, the hard part is to say, they do make money, they very likely can buy back shares, and support the value of this. So we very likely can still see an upward break, okay? An upward break right here, retest, I wanna say retest this previous area right here. That's really the first segment, if you understand, okay? So that, and then we're very likely going to find some sort of range in here, and the way we break up or down from there determines the next move, okay? But what else do I wanna give you? I wanna give you this chart. Of alpha trends. Let me copy it instead. Okay. And so here, I'll zoom this out. Okay. The way I always looked at this was you usually have a first shelf that you declined from. So you have the top, you have a first shelf you declined from. You have a small second shelf in which you have either a flag shape or you have this W shape. But what usually happens on the second part is they comment about how in here, you sometimes have these weird rallies where bad news causes it to shoot up. You have shorts covering essentially. What that does is it breaks this up back toward previous levels, but then rejects. So I do think that Google has this possibility if we are in a stage of decline right here. One thing to consider, and go ahead and read this yourself later. I do have it in the all over the Discord because I find it to be a very good indicator of a way for you to review what's going on. But here, early decline and mid decline talk about how you can look at moving averages and see if they are still respecting certain moving averages. So what I'll do here is I'll pull up my, this is Bollinger Band with a bunch of my averages on there. Pull that up. What that'll do in here, get rid of some of these. So I've got all these 5, 10, 50, 100, 200, right? And as a result, you can see we're coming back toward this green one, which is the 100-day moving average. We still haven't broken over the 200-day moving average. You also will consider here with Google, we had our yellow break down below our blue, and it hasn't made it back up above, and that's our death cross, right? Okay, so Google, until it breaks, it could use this and supports this, but I could see this coming back down and it really doing something like that in terms of it, right? Because here it says rallies to longer term moving averages typically fail as more participants lose hope in a rally and the reality of the declining stock starts to settle in. These stocks offer excellent shorting opportunities. And you also see it has this little shape of this declining sine wave as well, right? And you have this declining sine wave. Okay, so this still could come back up. I want you to be careful about that because that would essentially just play out this little part and then it would start to go further down. Okay, that would be depression, recession fears of the future due to the fact that our yield curve and those things have gotten pretty bad. And you know, if the Fed does surprise with a rate suddenly when people don't expect it, that could also cause that type of reaction. We also do have to think about how there is the Taiwan and China tensions, Russia and Ukraine still happening. You still have all these issues in terms of the supply of oil and then, you know, the electric grid and things like that, supply of EVs, et cetera. So, you know, it's not to say that like, you know, everything's going kaput, but it's just what could be that black swan event that causes the problem. Or also you want to think about how China is also going through a mortgage crisis as well, where they promised a bunch of houses and nothing's been built and the money's kind of disappeared into the money into the pockets of businessmen. There's a lot of monetary issues that could be coming up. Okay, let's go into Roblox. Let's go, we'll finish off the charts that we have. It shouldn't take too long because all of what we're looking at, it's either going to go through that type of accumulation like we've talked about, or it's going to go through a little bit more of a distribution process. And ultimately, you can take a look now at our volumes. I want to say Roblox down here is showing some solid strength in terms of the buying here, right? When you think about the amount of people, like I had told you, there's people that have bought down here, there's people that have bought down here. So you've got kind of a solid big money support down here, right? They're down in the 20s and this is back up in the 40s, okay? What else you can also think about is, there is the possible head and shoulders formation. We still have a possible down and back up that we could have as well. And a bit of what ended up happening with earnings, you want to keep in mind, earnings did kind of what we expected if we were to think about how, you know, my explanation about the economy, my explanation about how, you know, this is based upon kids spending money on their app and on their game. While they may be collecting data, if that data is not necessarily being sold, then at the end of the day, they still have to make up that, okay? So what was really interesting was this candle for today was actually, it opened low, went back down and went a little bit higher. Do you see that? So ultimately not terrible, but it does show that there is a possibility that we will, right? If we do respect this, we could just continue to head back up. So if we break back above, or if we break back below, those would be your indicators of, hey, we've got another possible fib to aim for, or we could go further up. That makes sense? But the amount of buying, I will point out, these big candles that stick out are good. And here's another thing. So look at this, breakout, low volume breakouts, okay? This one, you could argue was kind of a big one, okay? But the lower volume breakouts could be an indication that the sellers aren't there anymore, right? And that price is ready to move. Let's go on to the next one. We got Matterport, MTTR. Matterport's a pretty cool company. What they do is they do LiDAR. They have this device, which is also ultimately a three-dimensional or 360 camera, and it takes LiDAR pictures that help you visualize and help you VR and you know, interact with the space. It's great for things such as your real estate. And you know, I actually do have a buddy that works for them. And one time they had this thing that was circulating through the company, which was some dude's house that was just, this guy had hoarded a bunch of stuff. It was like, you know, a specific location that they had taken pictures of everything. And they're like, go find the bathroom that's in a bathroom, or go find, you know, this or that. And you could actually navigate through the whole place. It was really cool. So in terms of the future, Matterport's actually the kind of company, and I've heard people say this is the kind of company that could be worth hundreds and hundreds in the day, in the future, but they definitely still have to get their ducks in a row. They do have a really cool product. They are profitable to an extent, I want to say. Let me double check real quick. Yeah, their profit margin has done great recently. Okay, so they're starting to do better. But if you look at annually for the last year, the profit margin took a big tank. And right now is where it's starting to get a little bit better, right? But let's continue here. I do see, right, Matterport did report earnings. I think they popped a little bit. They are going through a little bit of an accumulation looking process. But the thing I don't love is the fact that the volume down here is so darn low. The amount of big money purchasing, I can't tell you where they are if you think of it here. Does Matterport still have further down to go? I could see it come back down. Right now, it's due to the fact that the company itself is still reporting negative earnings though, okay? So accumulation range, you could argue this was your, you know, because this is a bigger group of people right now, this could be your preliminary supply that creates the top end of that range, right? Then we have a bunch of selling, and you can also say there's still selling here. This is maybe the bottom part of our range. And until we break up or we break down, it's really tough to say right now, because how their earnings continue to show. If they still continue to lose money, this is going to go back down. But if we do have a breakup and they start to show, hey, you know, we're bringing in good revenue and this company can be profitable in the future, or again, it could be possible where their company gets bought out by something bigger to use their devices for things, then that would cause that type of pop. In terms of potential, this company has great potential. If you're willing to wait, I could see this definitely heading back up, and it's at a good price point where, I mean, averaging down in this area would not be a terrible idea for a 10-year type of play, because LiDAR and, you know, our phones that do face detection and your Face ID type of thing, that's using LiDAR. It has to judge the distance from the phone and the camera to your face and use those calculations to determine whether you are you or not, okay? This is the same idea where it's just gonna be detecting the room and figuring out who's in the room or what's in the room and then creating pictures for you. And so again, Matterport does have some good future potential, but it's hard right now to say where exactly it can go. It has I would say probably the upper bound is right here, and right here, you can imagine, right? Where we're getting close to it. How it reacts to it and whether it breaks out of this downward channel will give you some confirmations of where it's headed, okay? But I will definitely say as earnings continue, those will be your indicators of whether or not Matterport can be something that does well in the future. Let's see, Bros, Dutch Bros. They had a pretty nice rejection from this bottom over here. They got a bunch of buying down here after that bad earnings report you can see here, okay? Lost money, etc., but they surprised in terms of revenue. But that just means that operating costs have gone up, right? Now, we are back above this, but we're now sitting at this bottom range of this channel, okay? We do have, that's not what I wanted. We do have a channel here, but the way this works in a lot of cases is it's more of a bearish situation. You have a more likelihood of doing this. If we respect, so we have broken up into a higher channel, okay? We're still not out of the downward trend. So bullishness, what I would say, if it continues to respect where we're at right now and starts to break up above, that would be a very nice bullish sign. But in terms of this wedge that we're in, the wedge itself is more of a bearish sign of the fact that we're actually going to head back down toward these potential levels here, okay? Real quick though, yeah, we've got some relief that needs to come from my stochastic at least. I think it already started to play out a bit. Yeah, started to play out a bit on the 1 hour. But here's your divergence, guys. Do you see that? Higher, higher, lower, lower. Okay. So there is some divergence forming in this situation that shows, especially with this type of a pop, you can always look in a little bit closer and take a peek as to see if you get some sort of divergences right after the pop and the sell-off, if it goes higher and diverts, etc. But keep in mind, bigger picture will give you a little bit more confidence behind what's going on there. In terms of their company, profit margin's not doing too great. I wonder what the case for that is. Company itself, almost 7 bill, volume, couple mil. Oh, the shape that it's in, buy up, buy up. Yeah, give it a little bit of relief and it very likely is just going to retest the upper bound of where we're at. It can break up and above back into previous trading channels, but just keep in mind there's this pretty significant amount of resistance up here with these people up here, okay? Breaking above that 45, 46 is going to be tough. So far, I would just say that probably in most cases, you'll see it continue to respect this channel. So if I was going to draw something right now, probably come back down toward this channel, retest the upper boundary of that, where we're at. That's what I see. Okay. Rivian. Been seeing some more of these trucks around. They're kind of cool looking, but I follow a couple people who just talk about the problems that they have with it. So you've got this down, this falling wedge, and then we've started to break ourselves up a little bit, but we're still at some very significant resistances. You'll see right there. Volume is, it's okay. I'm not gonna hate on it. We've got buyers here and here. But big drop, took a little bit longer. This one didn't let it go as far down. So right now, shoot, we're right at resistance though. Rivian, I think it very likely. Ooh. Earnings is right up around the corner. They reported 95 million last quarter. Hold on. They reported 95 mil and we're estimating that they're gonna hit 335 right now. I would short the F out of this, in my opinion, in terms of that type of expectation. Because, I mean, come on, guys. Look at these profit margins. You saw bad numbers earlier. How bad is this number? They lost $1 billion when they brought in $1 million. Bro. Okay. So company-wise, Rivian, right? Yeah, Amazon and their investment and all that, but dude, this is a disaster, guys. And you want to tell me you're going to bring in 300 mil? When is this earnings? June or August 11th, right? So it's just going to be tomorrow, but after, okay? So I think we're right at the resistance. But again, earnings is one of those things where I don't love to play earnings unless I really do feel that, things aren't going to get played around with it as much. Here's the thing is, this has gone up quite a bit. I would favor this to the downside. I probably won't necessarily be playing it because, again, with the way that things have been moving, look at Roblox, right? Roblox dropped, but then it came back with its gains with the CPI. So it's not just dependent upon them, but also what's going on around as well. There was, like, for example, I remember Chemo played and dealt with Alibaba earnings once, and earnings were actually good. Earnings went up, but as a result of the markets that day that were tanking, his earnings got wiped out due to it, even though he had put himself on the right side. Okay, so I think PPI is something to be concerned with. If PPI comes in and we don't see too much of a reaction, and this does end up staying right around here, maybe taking a small earnings gamble might not be terrible. But keep in mind, I'm calling it an earnings gamble because, again, I don't know what these numbers are supposed to be. But judging by them, I see as a very low probability that they're going to hit 300 mil on this situation. Unless for some reason you know that Rivian's output more cars in this last year, or everybody in your area just got the Rivians, maybe. But generally, and also with this type of shape that's formed, we have a relief to the downside in that situation, okay? And you can also look at it in terms of bigger picture. You do have a lot of these topping off and potentially headed back down from there if they do cross, okay? Let me finish this up. I wanted to go over Tesla. Tesla is very hard to gauge just because when things move on Tesla, they're very volatile. When shorts get out, things move fast, okay? But with the information of the split, information of Elon selling as well, I can see us rising a little bit, but potentially dumping it back down again. If you kind of notice, I'll let you guys go into this on your own. This is a little bit of an accumulation pattern, wouldn't you say, right? The W type of shape. And we broke up above, retested right here before heading up. So there's this now where we are interacting with the left side of this. So up or down would be the next position you would want to take. This is just going to be chop. Keep that in mind, okay? But yeah, with the split news coming up, you can look at here on the daily too. Daily, we're starting to cross. This is all starting to drop. If we break down below 50 on these, that would definitely be an indication that we could head further down. Okay. But yeah, Tesla 800 is pretty pricey, guys, right? They do need the split so more people can afford it. Okay, any last things, any other charts you guys want me to go through? Here, let me see what you said. Yeah, dog shit. That was that about Rivian, right? Rivian with the amount of money that they were losing. Yeah, but they've got a lot of support from the government though, and that's the thing. So the government can keep. Oh, I didn't do that. Let's look into that ABVV. Yeah, I didn't do. But yeah, the government supports them, and that's why they'll continue to churn out stuff. But at the end of the day, you know, those financials are not something I would put my money behind. ABBV is pretty much done a bit of what we said. It relaxed itself upward a bit, right? It is in a sense bouncing. You are getting these crossing indicators. So definitely if we break back above this 140, here's the thing with this, the two candles that you have both showed indecision to an extent, right? So since we charted, you have this popped up and came back down, but then you have this dropped and came back up, okay? Now with recent CPI data and everything, it does give this a possibility of heading further back up now due to the fact that the rates, et cetera, won't necessarily be moved up as quickly, okay? So, but one thing I don't love about here and what we see, and specifically because today what we've been trying to do is talk a little bit more about what the volume's necessarily looking like. Drop, drop, drop. We're going to compare drops. The first drop was extremely large with extremely large volume and large candles. That's expected. That's a lot of fear. Second time we came back down, these values and these candles start taking smaller ranges, which is good, okay? And we get a big bunch and big bout of buying back down, back up here to push it back up. But then when we head back down, the one I don't love is this big giant candle. This volume does not tell me we've exhausted people down here in terms of people that are willing to let go of their shares. So what is big money necessarily? I would say with big money would be looking at this saying, hey, push it down. Let's see if we can snatch up some more shares down at these levels, okay? And as a result, use that before it pushes back up. So this right here is kind of what we would consider a bear flag shape, but at the end of the day, if it breaks up, it can still go up. If it breaks down, that's where we would want to take those positions headed down, right? So as of right now, it's really just said, we're just going to sit in this range till we decide if we want to go up or down, because the buyers haven't exactly shown they want to buy and push it up. And the sellers have actually shown, we don't want these prices anymore. Do you see that? Right? These guys show we don't want it up here anymore. Okay. That makes sense? So the first play that we gave you of that relief, that already played out, right? How far it wasn't going to go, it could go all the way back up here. There's still a possibility, right? And you could take that position if we do break up above 143 or so. There is this gap that you want to possibly look for, right? You have this gap right here. So that could be a gap to fill. Okay, back up toward 150. Cool. All right. Sorry I changed the time on you guys today. I know I'll usually try to do it at 6 on Friday, not Friday, on Wednesday. But depending on when classes are with ICA, and also today, it was funny. I got a call from a buddy of mine I play basketball with. He's like, hey, you know anybody who might want to coach our middle school team that helps funnel into our high school? And I was like, me, maybe. So I'm meeting up with the coach at about a little bit before 7 to potentially sign myself up for that after school type of thing. So it's actually a paid position. I wasn't even looking for that. I just wanted to be involved in the basketball community in terms of the younger kids here, and it's an opportunity I wanted to jump on. So sorry for pushing class around on you guys a little bit there, but again, you guys are still going to get this info from me either way. even as I play, even as I coach basketball, don't worry, I'm still going to be here. It's a multiple things that I do. I've always been known as that guy that does everything that he can. So, but in terms of the charts, if you guys have additional ones that come to mind later, I'll be happy to go into that later when I get home. But I hope today's charting session was helpful. If you want to go through that PDF that I posted in ICA Graduates, and you guys can talk about it in there as well, talking about the accumulation distribution and trying to match them up, I'd be happy to see what it is that you possibly see, and we can go from there.
Cool, thanks, Eric. That actually was super helpful.
Yeah, I mean, we're just going to keep this going. When Kimo and I first started talking about this class, we said, it was going to be, the 1 to 2 weeks of class, and from there we'll see how things go. But I realized that, teaching you guys for a week, the markets change so much week to week. It's impossible for you to stay updated on everything. And so I do know that I'm gonna be listening. I always have my ears open for what's going on. And if I can relay the information for you guys can take on better positions for yourself ultimately. So, the goal here is to give you guys some time. So at the end of the day, you guys can spend the time where you want to. But let me know what it is that I can help you guys out with. I'll have this posted for everybody else and for you guys to review as well. Yeah, let's keep up the good work. Especially with you two, I do also want to commend you guys for continuing to post things. That's one thing that, it's very easy for your regular day job and life to kind of take over, and for this to kind of end up on a back burner. But it is the continued interaction with these things that help you grow, and keep that up. I'll always commend you guys for it, and I'll always give you guys what it is that I see in terms of the charts. All right.
Cool. Thank you. Have a good time at the basketball thing.
Oh, definitely. It's always a good time. You have a good rest of your guys' night. I'll talk to you guys soon.